Tonight on Nation to Nation, we're coming to you from the AFN Special Chiefs Assembly on federal legislation. The Prime Minister once again delivered remarks. Based on past history, Regional Chief Isadore was cautious about what the PM promised.
Well, you know, the spirit of the white paper is still alive and well from the colonial perspective and the way the federal government deals with First Nations.
Indigenous Relations Minister Bennett wants chiefs to buy into the proposed rights framework. One Saskatchewan leader isn't so sure.
You know, this is the message to Minister Bennett and your staff. You need better advisors. You need to ensure that when you're speaking to First Nations, it's driven from First Nations.
The family of Colten Boushie attended the meeting. They want a royal commission into the lack of justice for Colton.
Actions need to be taken. It should not just be meetings and talks anymore. And so we're here to call on the chiefs to help us in advancing this call.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and welcome to Nation to Nation. It was day 2 of the AFN's meeting in response to last Valentine's Day. That's when the Prime Minister proposed a framework to recognize and implement Indigenous rights. This morning, he addressed chiefs in attendance.
There's no question that setting Canada on the right path of partnership and reconciliation with recognition and affirmation of and implementation of rights is something that will transform this country. I obviously hope to have more than one mandate to do it, but I even say that what we have managed to accomplish in 2.5 years has changed irreversibly Canada and set us forward on a much better path.
Isidore watched the speech from the Prime Minister and paid close attention to Trudeau's answers to questions from chiefs. Joining me now is the Regional Chief for the Assembly of First Nations in Ontario, Isidore. Chief Day, welcome to Nation to Nation.
Nice to be here.
Now, of course, the Prime Minister has once again addressed the Assembly. He's done this for a few years now. So what did you hear in today's speech? Was it something new or the same old, same old?
Well, I think he talked about, again, the nation-to-nation relationship. He did talk about his announcement from February 14th. But on the floor, you know, there was, again, recognition of the child welfare piece that I think is a very important piece for us, and that should be always at the forefront. So, again, we commend the efforts there. Like, something has to change. But the one issue that did come up was with regard to the fiscal issues and the fiscal relationship. And, you know, one of the chiefs got up and spoke and pointed very specifically to the 2% cap issue. The question was the cap lifted and what has been done about it?
Did you get a satisfactory answer? Because in the last 2 budgets, the Liberal government has put in billions of dollars of spending. Well,
listen, those are investments. But if the federal government hasn't been able to clearly quantify the impact, so let's look at this for a second. 1996, ironically the year of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, under the Chrétien government, Paul Martin, Finance Minister, imposes the 2% cap. That 2% cap over 20 years has anywhere from a $28 billion to a $30 billion cumulative impact. Now, if we're already starting out from a substandard situation, you know, has the government dealt with that? And it's also uncanny that, you know, we're about a $30 billion shortfall in infrastructure spending across First Nations in Canada. So again, if they were to say, let's inject $30 billion, let's deal with this thing once and for all, that would elevate our standard of living. It would deal with the issues, and then we'd see some movement. But it seems to be that the whole trinkets and you know, the very small increment approaches to this is still the status quo of this government, and I think that they need to do much better.
Now, of course, the Assembly was called for another issue, which was the proposed framework in legislation on Indigenous rights. How well have First Nations been consulted so far on that?
Well, you know, it's, again, a fast-track process, as we keep hearing. This Liberal government intends to impose and introduce legislation before this term in office, which means that, you know, we're, again, going to be behind the 8 ball. Many concerns around the diversity around the funding to be able to do this. And again, is this going to be a situation of engagement? Will organizations like the AFN, Chiefs of Ontario, be the conduit for engagement and sign off on consent? That should never be. Our concerns within our regions are you need to get down to the ground, you need to deal with the rights holders. That's going to be the fly in the ointment here. There's just no way for the government to fast track this if in fact they got to go to the communities and the rights holders to essentially get the sign off and participation of the rights holders.
There's still a lot of distrust, especially associated with the name Trudeau. Can we put the ghost of the 1969 white paper away now, or is this just another version of it, this framework initiative program that they got going?
Well, you know, the spirit of the white paper is still alive and well from the colonial perspective and the way the federal government deals with First Nations. Again, we still have the inherent rights policy. You know, there's a number of pieces of legislation and policy that are directly connected to the 69 white paper approach. Our First Nations simply need to get down to the brass tacks of the issue. Again, pay for the 2% cap. There's outstanding debt owed to First Nations, and it shouldn't be through contribution agreements or proposal-based funding. It has to be in increments of resources as well as land. This is now boiling down to a land issue. And if you see what's happening, this federal government is quite prepared to co-draft legislation on unland-related issues. When it comes to co-drafting, co-development, and respecting First Nation rights, these environmental legislation and bills, simply the federal government is moving unilaterally on them, and that's going to be the problematic issue that we face.
Now, of course, at the end of next month, in about a month, we're going to have a provincial election here in Ontario. Do you have a preference for who gets in there? Is there any fear of a possible Doug Ford-led government?
Well, obviously, our chiefs right across the Ontario region are definitely going to say we must be nonpartisan, but we know who we've been able to work with. It is the current Liberal government. Listen, message to Doug Ford. You know, you've said that you jump on the bulldozer on your own and go make the roads and the Ring of Fire happen. You carry the branding of Ford Nation. The provincial government is not a nation. It must be clearly understood that if you're going to proceed, any government that comes in, you must respect the rights and authority of our First Nations. And you know, that being said, we're prepared to work with anybody that's willing to work with us. Our chiefs are watching the provincial election quite closely. I am, and again, prepared to sit down with anybody.
Well, we'll see what happens in just a bit of a month from now. Chief Day, I want to once again thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Todd.
After the break, we get FSIN Chief Bobby Cameron's thoughts about Minister Bennett's remarks yesterday. Welcome back to Nation to Nation. Indigenous Crown Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett addressed the Assembly of First Nations meeting in Gatineau on Tuesday, and she was selling the government's proposed Indigenous rights framework. The message to the chiefs was that it posed no threat to existing rights.
The framework has not yet been written. We are committed to co-develop this framework and walk the talk of nothing about us without us. Secondly, we know that the process isn't perfect, and we welcome any advice. We want your communities to know that, and we want to continue to improve how we engage. The era of Ottawa determining how and when and where your rights are implemented is over. And you need to hear from me directly. Nothing will be imposed.
One of those present needing convincing is Chief of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, Bobby Cameron. Nation to Nation producer Ken Jackson spoke to him about that and more.
Thanks, Chief, for being here with us.
Oh, appreciate it. I mean, it's an important event. It's an important gathering. I mean, a lot of crucial items on the agenda and some decisions to be made. I mean, we're looking at some potential legislation. I mean, one in specific is the language, where we've continually said to Minister Joly and her staff, in order to preserve, promote, and protect languages, you must include our treaty elders right across this country. They're the true experts on language and culture. It's a no-brainer. It's a pretty simple message. Elders Advisory Committee on Languages is a crucial component.
Earlier we heard from Carolyn Bennett, and she was trying to dispel myths over the framework developments. I was curious what you thought of her speech.
Yeah, we've also related some messages to her as well, that the timeline that they're trying to promote is not enough time. The process is flawed because it has to be driven from a First Nation perspective. Once again, our elders have a crucial role to play in this process, inherent in treaty rights, and that relationship with the Crown is with the Governor General. Minister Bennett can do her part to ensure that the Governor General, Julie Payette, is involved with these crucial meetings with our people on our treaty lands. It's so very crucial. It's symbolic. The Governor General was part of those treaty negotiations. Therefore, the Governor General today has to be and must be part of those treaty meetings on our treaty lands. It's simple as that.
Now, there's been some concerns with how the consultations have developed. BC,
Oh, yeah.
There's concerns. We've heard a lot of rumors where they're asking organizations like yourselves to gather chiefs for them to do the consultation. Tell me what you think of that.
Yeah, no. As I said before, the concerns are not just in BC. They're in our region. They're in Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec. In fact, these regions are now working on a resolution to address it here today. We have to, this is the message to Minister Bennett and your staff. You need better advisors. You need to ensure that when you're speaking to First Nations, it's driven from First Nations. The solutions are in our First Nations chiefing councils and their elders and their leadership. In every sector, it's not just language, it's education, housing, health, justice, gaming, economic development, the list goes on and on.
What are some other things you're hoping to achieve here over the next 2 days?
Obviously, our chiefs will decide the next steps moving forward. Last night we had a really good 2.5-hour session with Minister Philpott. She met with our Chiefs Committee on Education for 2.5 hours. And this is the message to the other ministers. Take note, and I really hope you print that. Take note on Minister Philpott's leadership, her concern, her commitment. She doesn't just come in for half an hour and hit the road. I mean, we come here 2 times a year. Our chiefs spend a lot of time. They're taken away from their community. And they expect and they demand some serious time and commitment from our ministers.
Now, where do the grassroots fit in all this? Because they're not here. So tell me how they fit into all this.
So the grassroots people, for sure. I mean, for myself, we travel extensively to the First Nations and hear from grassroots people. The grassroots people vote their chiefing councils. Their chiefing councils have a voice here at this assembly, so that's probably their role. But they're important. I mean, we need their input, we need their guidance and advice and direction. So reach out to us, and whatever's going to enhance and make us stronger and better as a united First Nations, based on inherent treaty rights, we're all for it.
Now, there was a Saskatchewan Court of Appeal decision recently over a hunting decision. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, no, we've maintained that inherent and treaty right to hunt. You see, there's that inherent and treaty right. The 4 central reasons, the 4 main reasons why inherent and treaty rights are still alive today was that hunting, fishing, trapping, gathering way of life off the land. It was a way of life, and it still is for many of us. So, Mr. Perron, from Treaty 5 from Manitoba, hunted and killed a moose in northern, just north of Swift Current. Took it to the butcher shop. All was fine. It was unposted. It was land not being used for agriculture or any farming purposes. Took it to the butcher. The butcher puts a call into the conservation officer because, it is a racist. It is a racist province. There is some racism. The butcher phoned the CEO. CEO did an investigation, and Mr. Perron cooperated. They took him out to the location where he shot the animal. He didn't deny. He just went along with what the CEOs are doing. Well, they found out it was on private land, so they put a call into the farmer. Farmer being upset, and probably there's a good chance he was racist, said charge him. That's my land. So anyway, charged them, went to provincial court. Provincial court decided not guilty because it was an inherent treaty right to hunt case. That was the first and foremost. Then we got into it was not posted. It was land that was not being used for agriculture or farming purposes. So therefore, the treaty right to hunt is, supersedes provincial law. It supersedes federal law. Our inherent treaty rights are international law, and time and time again, court case after court case tells us this. This message to government. Our inherent treaty rights are alive and well, and they're still strong. So we appealed it. We helped Mr. Perron all along the way. Went to a second decision where they found him not guilty.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much.
After the break, the Colten Boushie family attended the meeting to ask for support. We'll hear what they have to say coming up. Welcome back to Nation to Nation. It's been nearly 3 months since Gerald Stanley walked out of a North Battleford courtroom a free man. He stood trial for the second-degree murder of Colten Boushie. Since then, Bushie's family has been seeking justice for Colton, even meeting with federal cabinet ministers shortly afterward. They returned to the nation's capital, now meeting with some chiefs in assembly. We spoke to them earlier. Once again, here's Nation to Nation producer Ken Jackson.
Debbie, Jade, everyone, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it's been a few months since the verdict that shook the country. Can you take me back to the moments, Debbie, when you're in the courtroom and you heard the word not guilty?
I was in shock. Couldn't believe that everything they told us to do, we did. We remained quiet. We were silent like they told us to. And then when the verdict was given, I was in total shock because I thought we were going to get fair justice, that anybody that kills would actually go to prison, but not in this case, and was due to the color of our skin.
Jade, brass tacks, this is not a case of evidence. Like, I'm the man admitted, Gerard Stanley admitted to killing Colton. If not murder, why not manslaughter? It should have been automatic, don't you think?
Well, yeah, like you said, he admitted to taking the life of my brother. He admitted to having the gun in his hand that took the life of my brother. And yet, amongst a jury of his peers, of an all-white settler jury, they acquitted him and justified his actions as acceptable, that it's okay to take another's life on a premise that it was worth less than material property, and was able to go home with his family, and is at home with his family at this moment. That is not justice.
Debbie, now after the verdict, you guys came to Ottawa. You met with the federal government, ministers, I believe, in Trudeau. What was it like to do that, and what's happened since then?
I was very proud and honored that we were there, and they listened to us, what we had to say, and that discrimination in Saskatchewan needs to stop. Racism also.
Jay, what did they promise, the federal ministers, to you? What did they say they were going to do?
With regards to those meetings, there wasn't much promise or anything said from the ministers. It was more or less us meeting with them and sharing our experiences through this entire ordeal. You got, like my auntie said, we participated. We were cooperative. We were patient. We advocated. We worked and endured the system. We went through the entire proceedings, and at the end of it, we were told that this man did no wrong and he was allowed to go home. And so we were able to actually tell our story, share our pain and our experiences firsthand from our words and our accounts. And so that's what those initial meetings were about. In terms of follow-up, we haven't yet actually had a follow-up with the ministers. in regards to what is going to be done now. It's more... So with that, we then proceeded to the United Nations and spoke at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and advocated to have an outside source once again come in and conduct a study, because at this point we don't have trust in the officials of Saskatchewan to hold themselves accountable to the structural racism that we are enduring as a family and as Indigenous people across the country. So once again, we want an outside source coming in, investigating, and showing the truth, the ugly colors of the Canadian justice system.
So you went there with a message. That message you're bringing to here now, to the AFN Assembly. Debbie, what do you want to tell the chiefs in that room back there, or behind you? They're gathering behind us as well.
That we would appreciate their support, prayers, that the prayers need to keep coming, and that way we can keep going.
You, Jade?
Of all the meetings we've had, when we speak with Indigenous people and representatives, one of the things we don't have to do is humanize my brother. We don't have to make him seen as a human being, because to them they see him as their own son, as their own nephew, as their own brother, as, you know, one of their own, and we don't have to work so hard to explain that Colton was loved and is missed dearly. So here on this platform, we are advocating for support upon this study to then advance a royal commission upon the systemic discrimination and racism within the Canadian justice system. Because once again, this is not something new to Indigenous peoples and to families, and something needs to be done. Actions need to be taken. It should not just be meetings and talks anymore. And so we're here to call on the chiefs to help us in advancing this call.
And Debbie, tell me, you have a lot of work you're doing in the legacy, on Colton's legacy, and unfortunately that's something you have to do, and you shouldn't have had to do that. Tell the viewers, or tell me or anybody right now, what do you want people to remember of Colton?
That he was a human being, and he was respectful, polite, well-mannered, educated, intelligent. He had a life, a future ahead of him, but that's been all squashed. So I'm here to say that I just don't want this to happen to another family. We want justice for, who knows, for the next family that gets hurt this way, that everything's done in that right way. And justice would be served for that person.
Anything you wanted to add to that, Jade? Okay. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to speak to all of you.
Thank you.
After 2 weeks away, we'll be back in our familiar Ottawa studio next Thursday, and we'll once again be talking to our political panel of MPs on the issues affecting Indigenous people. And if you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcasts. Go to aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Todd Lamoran. Have a great evening.